If I can ask you to stand by, we just want to update viewers on exactly what is going on. Right now we have the FAA, the Air National Guard, and the Coast Guard searching for the plane of John F. Kennedy Jr., a single-engine Piper Saratoga that took off last night after 8:30. We are told by sources here at ABC News, as well as sources according to the Associated Press, that Kennedy was on board, John F. Kennedy Jr., along with his wife Carolyn Bessette Kennedy and her sister. There are conflicting reports as to whether or not there were 3 or 4 people on board that plane when it took off from the Essex County Airport, otherwise known as the Caldwell Airport in New Jersey. They were headed for Martha's Vineyard, where they were going to the home of the late Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, and they would continue on today, we are told, to Hyannisport for the wedding of Rory Kennedy. 275 guests were assembled there. Much of the Kennedy family was there waiting for that. That wedding, we are told, has been called off. You're looking right now at some live pictures of the Coast Guard as it searches the water. They tell us it is an intensive search. An emergency beacon was heard last night around 2 o'clock in the morning. That was near Long Island, but when they went to find that beacon, trace down that signal, they were unable to do so. But then we are told by the FAA that the plane was last reported on the radar near Martha's Vineyard, which is much further north of the location where that emergency beacon was heard. So it is unclear if, in fact, that plane ran into trouble, where it did, and where it might have gone down. If, in fact, that's what happened. The plane was due in Martha's Vineyard. It has not landed. Barbara Walters is on the phone with us right now, our colleague from ABC News. Barbara has known and spoken with many members of the Kennedy family for years. Barbara, they're having an anxious time. They've just held a mass, obviously, praying for the safety of John Kennedy Jr. and his wife. This must be a terrible, terrible experience on what was supposed to be a joyous occasion, the wedding of Rory Kennedy.
Well, it is a hideous time. Rory Kennedy was Bobby Kennedy's youngest child. She was born after he was assassinated. And, you know, those of us who are, who have followed the Kennedys from the time of President Kennedy have just seen, if this indeed is the tragedy we are all dreading, have just seen tragedy after tragedy. Hyannis is the summer home of the Kennedy family, although John Kennedy Jr.'s mother, the late Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, had the house in Martha's Vineyard, and at the time of her death, although her New York apartment was sold, her children, John Kennedy and Caroline, wanted to keep the Martha's Vineyard home, and that's where they would come in the summers, and that's why it was automatic for them to go there and stay overnight. And then it was just a very short trip to Hyannis. It would be like, a half hour from Martha's Vineyard, and he probably would have flown, taken that plane, flown, and landed in the Hyannis airport for what would have been a joyful weekend. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
You were just talking about this. We have a clip from an interview that you did with John Kennedy Jr. recently. We wanted to roll part of that, and we'll come back to you right after that.
Let me just tell you when this was, all right? This was an interview that was done when he first took over George magazine, and at that time people felt, well, it might make it, it might not make it. This was a new venture for him. He was not yet married to Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, not Carolyn Bessette then, and Jacqueline Onassis had never met Caroline. So this was in the early stages of what has turned out to be a very good and very responsible career for him. The terrible sadness is that at this point in his life, he had really come into his own as an excellent publisher, as a good reporter, doing articles himself for George, being married now several years with a marriage that seems to be solid, keeping themselves out of the limelight, very serious and responsible people. And this interview was done a few years back when he had just come to the magazine, but we asked him a lot of the questions that seem so, that resound so today as we wait for this news. So
and we should hasten to add, we hope that this, in fact, will be, that the news will be good when we do hear it. But let's go and listen to the clip now.
Most children seem to have an extra burden to find themselves, to be themselves. Do you think you have found yourself?
I think part of what famous children have is that they have an abundance of opportunity, and that life circumstances doesn't force them to, choose, and you got to choose.
So now my wife and I prepare for a new administration and for a new baby. Thank you.
John F. Kennedy Jr. was born to the spotlight. and spent most of his 35 years avoiding its glare. He stepped into the frenetic flashes of the press corps with the news that he was joining them.
I don't think that I've seen as many of you in one place since they announced the results of my first bar exam. So
it seemed inevitable that his fate and politics would one day intertwine. What no one expected was that John would choose the role of observer rather than participant. As the son of the 35th President of the United States unveiled his new magazine, named for the first.
Ladies and gentlemen, meet George.
You have avoided the press, have now made yourself, in a sense, one of them.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you can't beat them, join them, right? Say your messages, Mr. Cohen.
The fanfare may be more about John than George. But even so, the results are impressive. 500,000 copies of this hip, nonpartisan political magazine flew off newsstands nationwide in just 4 days.
That's great to make them out of corn.
Making it the most successful debut in magazine history.
And how long will it take us?
Did you discuss this magazine with your mother?
Yeah.
What'd she say?
Yeah. Well, I think we showed her a mock cover, and she was a little skeptical. But I think that she'd always encouraged both Caroline and I to make our own way, to not subordinate our own lives to the expectations of what we should do with our lives. And so in that respect, I think she got a kick out of it.
Do you mind all the stuff about you?
What stuff?
The stuff about being sexy and attractive, and every time you see another woman, there's all of this. Is she the one? Is this the one?
Listen, people could say a lot worse things about you, right? And then you were attractive and you look good in a bathing suit.
I want to ask you some of the questions that you ask politicians in your magazine, okay? These are your questions, your magazine's questions, not mine, so they're deeply serious. You ready? What is your favorite vegetable?
Spinach.
Oh, you're going to be awfully popular with mothers all over America. If you were president, what would you do?
Well,
that'll teach you to start putting these questions in your magazine.
I think I would have to call my uncle, Teddy, and gloat for a moment. And then I think I would probably offer a big tax cut before the next election, and hopefully in between try to do some good.
Do you have any desire for politics, or is that something in your own head you ruled out?
No, I don't rule out anything. Public service should be something that you bring wholly yourself to. And I have sort of a life to live before I want to think about that.
To run for office. How did he answer to you?
I'm sorry, Elizabeth, you're talking to me?
Yes.
Well, at the time, he didn't seem to want to run for office. He has never totally ruled it out, but he certainly has done nothing to make it happen. There were never any exploratory groups that we see now, for example, with Mrs. Clinton. He never made any effort to run for Congress. He never did any of the things, for example, that Bobby Kennedy, that Robert Kennedy's sons did. They, several of them, and Ted Kennedy's son, who is in Congress, but several of them are in Congress. But John Kennedy, although he never said never, and maybe he thought that that might seem too harsh, he certainly never pointed himself in that direction. Twice he lost on his bar exam, did not pass his bar exam, so he never was a lawyer, a practicing lawyer, which could have been the experience that led to it. He seemed now, finally, to have come into his own as a magazine publisher, as a really very good reporter. He was able to handle the press in a way that has always been dignified and responsible. But although he never ruled it out, I have never seen, Michael, perhaps you have, any great desire to be in politics, and certainly it doesn't seem to be something that his mother would have wished for him. And you know how very, very close she was to both of her children.
Michael, what about that? Barbara, just wondering if, in fact, you had seen any desire on John Kennedy Jr.'s part, or still see any desire on his part to run for office ever?
Barbara's absolutely right, but John Kennedy has always made the point, I'm still a very young man, and there are oftentimes second acts in American history. And another thing that Barbara is saying, I think, very eloquently is the fact that he was such a graceful person. You know, it's very rare, not only in American history, but really in the history of world leaders, that you have the son of someone like Winston Churchill or of a Franklin Roosevelt having a very happy and successful life. Usually the odds are so against it because there's so many pressures on the son or daughter of the great leader. Here has been an exception.
We must say, when you talk about this family, its history in this country, and its personal history and tragedy, when you talk about the fact that they were heading up to Hyannisport for Rory Kennedy's wedding, Rory Kennedy was also among the Kennedys who was in Aspen not long ago when there was the death then of a family member. And this has got to be just a terrible sort of, I mean, it really sort of defies description to think that this sort of string of events and tragedies can keep repeating themselves.
You know, Elizabeth, I'm sitting here as you're talking, trying to count up the number of accidents and tragedies that have happened in this family, starting with Joe Kennedy and Rose Kennedy. 2 children killed, their daughter, Kathleen, their son, Joe, who was the heir apparent, the one that Joe Kennedy wanted to be president, a daughter who was mentally retarded and has been away for many years, being protected in a special place. That was a tragedy for the family at that time. Then John Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, the children, 2 children of Robert Kennedy gone. It is certainly more than you can count on one hand, and I'm not sure if we count that up, but it doesn't come to 2. It just seems to go on and on. The stroke that Joe Kennedy had, the years that he lived impaired, it's just beyond thinking. And when you talk about Greek tragedies, I mean, yes, we talk about the curse, and some people forget how many members of the family, this glorious family that had and in so many ways still has everything.
And we should remind everyone that we are indeed hoping that this will all turn out just fine. We don't know anything differently. We're simply commenting on the fact that it was Rory Kennedy's wedding that was scheduled for this afternoon, late this afternoon, that has been already indefinitely postponed while the family awaits news on the whereabouts of John Kennedy Jr. And we certainly hope that, as Barbara just pointed out, this isn't a continuation of what has been a long history of tragedy. And again, it was Rory Kennedy who was at Michael Kennedy's side when they were skiing in Aspen, and Michael was killed in a skiing accident there just a few years ago. Michael Beschloss, when you, did you know, so just out of curiosity, I know that Barbara knew John Kennedy Jr. quite well. Did you as well?
I knew him extremely slightly and liked him very much.
I think we just got some dial tone there. In your conversations with him, I mean, this George magazine, which was launched to a great deal of sort of skepticism from many as being valid and viable, and has actually really succeeded as late. I mean, was there a little bit of, see, I knew I could do this? I'm sorry. Barbara Walters, are you still on the phone?
Yes.
Okay. I'm being told we're going to go to you at this moment.
All right.
We were talking earlier, you and I, about the fact that John has come into his own, and in recent years was feeling very, recent months especially, very satisfied with George magazine. This was really a considerable risk, according to many, that he really launched and succeeded in doing well.
Well, nobody expected him in the beginning to make a success. There were many advertisers who wanted to buy ads in George magazine because it was John Kennedy Jr., and he always, from the time he was a very little boy, had this charm and this charisma, but he wasn't the kind of young man. I mean, and I certainly can't.
Sometimes up Hyannisport, we were just unclear as to whether or not that was happening last night, as you said, after they dropped somebody off, or whether or not they would do that today. Lisa, let's go back to that descent, that radar sweep that your sources have been telling you, and we should report this is all preliminary and unconfirmed at this point, but how are they characterizing that kind of a rapid descent?
They are calling it a dive, quite simply. They said prior to that, as we had mentioned, the plane was descending normally. It was at about 2,500 feet, descending at about 500 feet a minute. Okay, that's not cause for alarm. Then the plane on the radar shows at about 2,200 feet. Again, there seems to be nothing out of the ordinary. The plane is making a descent as it approaches Martha's Vineyard, about 20 miles outside the airport. And then all of a sudden, 12 seconds later, as that radar sweep comes around, the plane is at 1,200 feet. Our sources are saying that if those radar hits ultimately prove to be accurate, and as John Nance has said, you have to double check because you can get false radar hits. There's all sorts of things.
Right.
You know, you need to be careful. If that's accurate, the plane would then be traveling at about 4,500 feet a minute. Our source simply said that's a dive.
All right, Lisa Stark, keep standing by if you would, please. We're going to go now to Beth Toomey on the phone. She's with the West Tisbury Airport and is sort of involved in this air search. Beth, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
There have been some reports, unconfirmed, of debris that has been found. Can you tell us anything about that?
A few minutes ago, we had a report to my police department that the state police were on their way to Up Island to investigate finding a wheel and a sneaker. That's the only information we have at this time.
I'm sorry, Beth, we had some noise here. A wheel and a sneaker found where?
Up Island, up in the Chilmark-Aquina area.
When you say Up Island, are you talking about in the water or on land?
This is on land, on the vineyard, and 2 towns that are up island from the airport.
And have those, I assume you're sending somebody out to confirm whether or not that in fact has been found, or whether or not, we don't know if this has anything to do at all with John Kennedy Jr.'s plane, correct?
Yeah, I'm not in charge of sending someone out. The state police have dispatched someone to go look at that. I'm just receiving that information. And we have no information of what plane, or if this even has anything to do with an airplane.
Absolutely. It's important to keep that in mind. Can you just put it into perspective for us, Beth, how far away that is from the airport where John Kennedy Jr. was trying to land?
I have no information of where he was trying to land.
He was trying to land at the Vineyard Haven Airport in Martha's Vineyard.
That's correct. And well, we have no information of that he was trying to land here, but if you're talking about the distance from that area to the airport, it's just a few minutes from that area by plane to this airport.
Relatively close. All right, Beth. Anything else you can add for us?
No, we're just standing by waiting to hear more news.
All right. Thank you so much, Beth. Let's go back to Lisa Stark. Lisa, are you hearing anything about this debris?
We have contacted the Coast Guard as well as the Air Force, and officially from their searching anyway, they are saying at this point that they have not spotted any debris. So obviously they have a lot of vessels out, they have a lot of planes up, and the Coast Guard and the Air Force is reporting that they have located no debris.
I think this debris, however, that Beth Toomey was telling us about is something that was found on land, she said. A couple of towns up. Something found on land, perhaps washed up on shore, but this was not found in the water.
Well, I have only talked to the Coast Guard and the Air Force, and as far as they're concerned, they have found nothing. Now, if the local police there, at Martha's Vineyard have found something additional, the Coast Guard and the Air Force is not aware of it at this time.
All right. John Nance, are you still with us on the telephone?
Yes, I am, right here.
All right. Just out of curiosity, when Lisa was describing just moments ago this descent and this as it's being characterized as a dive because it was rather quickly, you still say it's possible to pull out of that safely.
Yes.
Stunt airplanes do it on a routine basis, but would a pilot with the kind of training that John Kennedy Jr. had, what kind of training do you have to deal with situations like that?
Well, if you see where you are, this is really the key point. If you see where you are, then it's a simple matter. You pull and you pull on the yoke, and the dive can be arrested. But if you don't know where you are, if you're out of control, if you are disoriented, you're not even sure which side is up, the instruments are spinning, that's the worst case scenario. That's a situation in which you won't even know which way to pull, or even if you need to pull. Now, presumably, if you're going 4,500 feet per minute down, the airplane is accelerating. It's a simple matter of gravity and airspeed. And if it's accelerating, you can hear it and feel it. But the problem is, as I say, if he's lost visibility, if he's lost his knowledge of exactly where the horizon is and where he is in relation to it, i.e. in a right bank, a left bank, upside down, that's the worst case scenario. And it's very hard to explain a 4,500 foot per minute descent rate if, in fact, this turns out to be the case. All the cautions that we need to continually hammer away at. But it does not sound like the sort of thing where you're flying straight and level and now you begin a descent and you wrap the descent up. That just doesn't happen. It's more of an out-of-control scenario than anything that I can consider where he's got an excessive descent rate towards the water or towards the land just because he's pushing too hard. That just doesn't happen.
Given the kind of license that John Kennedy Jr. had to fly with that visual flight rules specification, what kinds of emergency over-water procedures would he have been trained to handle?
It depends entirely on the course of instruction he was given. If he was trained, somebody, I believe, don't know whether it was Lisa said that we think that he was trained at flight safety.
Right, no, that was me, and he was trained at a flight safety school.
That's one of the best companies in the country in terms of flight training, and they more than likely would have had something in their syllabus which would have exposed him to some of the basics, but that's a very quick reference because you're not training to fly over water specifically. It depends on whether he had sought any information and specifically considered what to do if he had a problem over water, and that's not outlandish to consider that he might have. If he was a careful pilot, as I believe he was, and he's aware that he's going to be flying over water to Martha's Vineyard quite a bit, then it would be correct for him to say, okay, what do I do? What do I consider in the way of procedures? Certainly, at the very least, carrying survival gear, carrying life jackets or life vests for each person that can be in the airplane, and possibly a raft, although those are very heavy, and I seriously doubt he would have had that. Those are a minimum that the preparations that you would make if you were going to be routinely flying over water as a private pilot, as well as knowing the basics of ditching. If the engine quits, you can't get it started, you're out of gas, or for some reason it simply won't start, how do you put the airplane into the water? What do? You leave the gear up, you put the flaps down, you do certain things, and that would have been a very quick amount of instruction. It's very well known, but he probably would have had to ask for it.
But, John, given the fact what you've already told me about this plane, and if it does have engine failure, suffer engine failure, its capability of gliding, if you leave disorientation out of the equation for a moment, what else could explain that kind of incredible descent?
Unfortunately, a lot of things. If we really kind of put the whole panoply of possibility there, we have to deal with structural failure. Certainly, there's nothing indicated here. Everything from mid-air collision to complete instrumentation failure, pilot incapacitation. They're just a wide panoply of possibilities. The most likely scenario, though, that I can give you is that if we do have a verifiable 4,500 feet per minute descent rate, it was not routine straight flying with the wings level. There was something else going on here catastrophically, and it did not probably involve any failure of the engine or any lack of fuel.
All right. John Nance, thank you so much. Let's go back to Lisa Stark for a moment. Lisa?
Hold on one second.
Is she there?
Sorry, Elizabeth.
That's okay.
I'm just trying to get more information for you.
Anything new to report there?
Not at this time. I'm trying to check a little bit more about this airplane and what we know about it, and when I find out, I'll be happy to tell you.
Well, while you're doing that, we will update our viewers. It's a Piper Saratoga, according to many experts, a high-performance single-engine aircraft. Most of these aircraft are well equipped once you lose that single and only engine to glide safely and make some sort of an emergency but safe landing. It can carry up to 5 to 6 passengers. We are told that this particular plane last night was carrying 3, possibly 4, but we're hearing mostly the number 3 passengers. John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, and possibly her sister Lauren. One of Carolyn's twin older sisters, we're told 18 months older than Carolyn, headed up to Martha's Vineyard, where they were scheduled to make a stop and then continue on to Hyannisport to attend the wedding of Rory Kennedy, the cousin of John Kennedy Jr. Her wedding was scheduled today at the family compound in Hyannisport. That wedding has been indefinitely postponed. The family has already held a mass this morning at the compound praying for the safety of John Kennedy Jr. and the rest of the people on board that flight. We are told that we have, I'm sorry, what's his name? Captain Holmes is on the phone with us, involved in the search and rescue effort. Captain Holmes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us. What can you tell us about the effort thus far?
Well, it's a fairly extensive effort. We've got both Coast Guard, Civil Air Patrol, and Air Force assets all out searching.
This is an enormous area to search. We were told by one Coast Guard official that it could take up to days to search this entire area.
Yes, ma'am.
Even though you have focused it now to the area just near Martha's Vineyard.
Yes, it is a rather extensive area, which is why we have so many assets out searching at the moment.
I've heard that many recreational vehicles, sort of sailboats, that sort of thing in the area have also volunteered to help. Are you accepting those offers?
They can certainly help, sure.
All right, tell me how you go about doing this. Do you divide this up into a grid and assign boats to certain areas? Can you just take me through how you're exactly executing this search?
Certainly. What we do is, actually, we're working very closely with our Coast Guard counterparts up in Boston. And we've divvied up certain search areas. We've taken an Air Force HC-130 from the Air National Guard in New York, and they're essentially an airborne air traffic control center for us, keeping all the different aircraft out of each other's hair. We have an H-60 from those same folks out searching just east of Long Island, and the Coast Guard searching in the Martha's Vineyard area.
And we've been hearing reports that there was, in fact, an emergency beacon detected about 20 miles away from Martha's Vineyard. Can you tell me anything about that?
As far as I know at this time, ma'am, that has been ruled out as not a player. There wasn't anything there.
There wasn't anything there?
No, ma'am.
But we do have reports that the plane was last spotted on radar about 19 miles from Martha's Vineyard. So can you tell me a little bit about where the area is that you're focusing this search on?
We're still concentrating predominantly east of Long Island and around Martha's Vineyard, although we have not ruled out anywhere in Long Island Sound, of course, which we won't rule anything out until we start finding some wreckage or any indication of where this aircraft might have gone.
We had just heard a report, a very preliminary, unconfirmed report of some debris found, I believe, on a beach a few minutes, a couple towns north of the Martha's Vineyard Airport. Have you heard anything about that?
We have just found out about that wreckage, ma'am, or that debris, and we're investigating at this time. I really don't know anything more about that, to be honest.
It's unclear whether or not that debris is even remotely related to this plane or anybody on board that plane.
That's correct, ma'am.
Can you tell me how many people from your particular department do you have involved in this?
I have 4 duty controllers working this particular incident.
All right.
And I also have 4 other duty controllers. Since we're responsible for federal response to search and rescue requests anywhere in the United States, I've got 4 duty controllers handling any requests across the nation.
And obviously people ready and able to help out with any survivors that might be found.
Absolutely.
All right. Captain Holmes, thank you so much for joining us and updating us on the search. We'll be in touch with you. For those of you just tuning in, here are the very latest details. A single-engine Piper Saratoga airplane with John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, and her sister Lauren, reported missing. Took off last night from an airport in New Jersey, headed to Martha's Vineyard, was supposed to land around 10 o'clock. And as it was making what appeared to be a routine descent, radar records show that it began a severe dive. We're not sure what caused the dive. There were no calls for help, no mayday phone-ins from the pilot at the helm indicating any kind of a problem. But the plane was last spotted on radar about 1,300 feet, 19 miles away from the airport, and after that we have no record of the plane at all. John